Thank you. Yeah. So yes, there was a clear idea about the seating. I think I was at the end of the table. So super. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yes.
I'm Geo. Good to see you. Yeah, nice to meet you. We contact on the phone. Yeah, exactly.
Paula, I think you are here.
Should we swap?
Yeah.
Okay.
Coming here, and you also here. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for staying for the second session or for joining today's for this second session where we will discuss ROK Europe Economic Security and Technology Cooperation. My name is Julia Terkovic. I'm Assistant Director at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy. And as I was saying, what we will try to do today is really try to unpack this Europe economic security and technology cooperation, these two elements, and try to see, I mean, we know they are both relevant for different reasons. I mean, they have an impact on global stability, national sovereignty, innovation as well. We discussed and we mentioned some of these elements this morning. And technologies are also at the center of this growing competition between global powers. So on the one hand, we are in a situation where countries are increasingly aware of their vulnerabilities that are deriving from these excessive dependencies. But on the other hand, technologies cooperation is what enables countries and industry to pool resources and expertise to drive innovation. So we find ourselves in this situation of having a tension, let's say, between the two. So what we will try to do in this second session today is to try to see how to reconcile these two aspects, and in particular to see how Europe and ROK are trying to reconcile these two elements. I'm really happy because we have a great pool of experts today that can unpack different aspects of these tensions. So first of all, we have Woo Jong-jeop, Senior Vice President of the Global Policy Office at Hyundai Motor Group. Thanks a lot. We also have Paola Tamma, EU correspondent for the Financial Times, and then Zhu Jingyan, senior specialist at the Center for Economic Security and Foreign Affairs of the ROK Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we also have Georg Riekels, associate director and head of the Europe's Political Economic Program of the European Policy Center. So the idea for the panel is for each speaker to make some introductory remarks for 5-7 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. The previous panel received a lot of very good questions, so not to put any pressure, but I expect the same for the second panel. Okay, so take notes because I'm sure there will be a lot to discuss and unpack. So, Woo Jung-jo, should we start with you? And until recently, you worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea, of course, but now you moved to the private sectors. And so it would be great to hear from you some reflection on how the ROK is approaching economic security and tech innovation on the other end, and also how it's trying to solve and use the link between public and private actors to solve some of these challenges.
Thank you, Julia. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to the BUV Korea Foundation and Ramon for having me today and have a great opportunity to share my views with the greatest panel today. I've been to Brussels several times in the past, but in the recent 2 years, I came in different capacities, as Julia just mentioned that. In 22, I came to attend a conference in Brussels as a think tank researcher. In 23, last year, I came to celebrate the 60 years of the diplomatic relations between Korea and EU as a Korea diplomat. And now I'm attending this conference as a corporate executive. When I was in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was a Director General for Strategy, and I was in charge of making implementation plan for the South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy. So I was tempted to intervene in the first session, but I refrained from it. I think my contribution this year will be to provide a different perspective as I am now in a private sector. I will come back why I brought up this, my personal stories later. So coming back to the subject of our session today, I will start with the most commonly discussed areas of cooperation. First of all, the most talked about cooperation these days lies in stabilizing and diversifying global supply chains. Disruptions in global supply chains caused by pandemic, geopolitics, and also changing domestic political landscape have forced not only governments, but also actors in private sector to adapt to it. Thus, the demand for working with the trusted partners has increased. With more than 60 years of good and stable relations between EU and ROK, it is almost natural that EU and ROK have increased the level of cooperation. So I can go through the areas of cooperation that which requires more enhanced cooperation between EU and ROK. So semiconductor supply chain cooperation, joint development of battery materials, and development of alternative technologies for rare earths are being discussed. So one of the the huge amount of import from EU to South Korea is the devices for manufacturing semiconductors in South Korea. And there is also the topic of stabilizing strategic materials and core technologies. Joint development of AI technology and quantum computing research cooperation are often talked between two. In addition, strengthening cybersecurity and protecting data sovereignty is also a hot topic these days. Harmonizing the regulatory measures in the field of personal information protection, 5G, 6G, security cooperation, etc. These are the areas that you probably heard many times that the EU and ROK can come up with a fruitful discussion on the cooperation. So topics such as hydrogen economic cooperation, SMR development and establishment of safety standards, and renewable energy technology exchange are very important. So again, I believe you have heard similar stories in other meetings so many times. Let me now discuss with how our discussions in the first session and the second session is different. I believe that some of you are in academia, some of are in the practitioners, but when we talk about international relations, we usually assume a country as a unitary actor, even if we don't follow the rational choice theory. In my experience, when ROK government was developing the Indo-Pacific Strategy implementation plan, all ministries and agencies didn't always necessarily agree because each ministry has different policy priorities. But because it is the Indo-Pacific strategy of Korean government, ultimately the position of Korea is determined as one. And when we talk to other countries, we assume a one-to-one relationship of ROK Europe, like today's meeting. So discussions in areas where this unitary actor assumption does not hold become very complex and difficult. So let's take a look at the economic security and technology cooperation between Korea and Europe from a private sector business perspective, and what are the constraints that exist in those discussions. It is true that these areas are very important in the future, so the cooperations between Korea and Europe will be very meaningful. The question is, who can promote these kinds of cooperation among business and how? For security policies, which we've discussed in the first session, it is the government that is in charge of planning and also implementing. But in economic security and technology cooperation, it's a different story. In the area of regulatory or protective measures, which can, in most cases, solely by government, finding the common ground is rather easy. This is only one pillar of the economic security. When we talk about economic security, the two important pillars are protection and promotion. In Europe, the elements of partnership is also added as a third pillar. But in terms of the content of the policy, protection and promotion are the main pillars. Currently, economic security policies are mostly discussed in terms of protection. And technological cooperation is also discussed more in terms of preventing technology leakage. It is not easy to discuss the promotion dimension because there are too many stakeholders involved. Is my time up already?
No.
For example, the US regulation of Chinese EV is probably accelerating the penetration of Chinese EV into the European market. And European EU just has the measures to regulate the penetration of Chinese EV into its market. However, the green transition in Europe requires technology development to lower costs, and many European countries want to have more investment in their own country. This creates conditions for competition between Korean companies, including ours, and European OEMs, and also those Chinese companies that are planned to make an investment in the European countries. So pictures became more complex when we think of the promotion side of economic security. I wonder what the policies should be enable voluntary technology cooperation between Korea and European companies. I mentioned that the areas of the possible cooperation between Europe and Korea includes semiconductors, batteries, rare earth materials, AI, data, quantum computing. So those areas are expected to determine the success of new industries in the future, and we hope to cooperate in this field as well. However, EU and EU member states, South Korea, and many other countries, they are developing their own industrial policies focusing on competitiveness. So when they are talking about like strategic industries and competitiveness, it is going to be really difficult to find a common ground who actually is going to implement these policies. So in security realm, the planning and the implementation can be done by a government, like one actor, but in economic security, the picture became so complex because there are so many actors involved in terms of planning and implementation. So as I just mentioned, that areas such as fostering strategic industries based on advanced technology will be the basis of each country's industrial policy. So competition is likely to prevail over cooperation in this area. So the question is, what kind of policies will make for businesses, private sectors in Europe and Korea find each other attractive for cooperation rather than competition? So we have like domestic political issues. In Europe, with limited resources, I think the newly formed EU Parliament and EU Commission, that they prioritize like defense policy, industrial policy, and green transition at the same time. And policies in this area should be also focused on promotion and protection. So we have to know that in terms of security cooperation, it's more of like protection of sovereignty and protection of rules-based international order. But in economic security, the only focusing on protection is not enough. Why we are protecting certain areas of technology and certain areas of economy? Because we want to maintain the technological gap in a hope that we can maintain certain advancement of the countries who disrupts the rules-based international order. So how we can maintain or even widen that technological gap with what kind of policies? So the protection is one, but while we're protecting our markets from the penetration of like Chinese EVs and Chinese batteries, but however, in terms of making progress on the promotion side is much more difficult. So it will be getting more and more necessary for policymakers and business people to exchange views to come up with good policies. So I think it's very timely for you to have me today, and thank Ramon, KF, and BUB to have me share my experiences and views with experts from both Europe and Korea. And I'll stop here and I'll ask questions as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great start. We will now move on to Paola Camma. And you have been, Paola, covering EU economic policy making for 7 years now. So you also face quite a challenging period in terms of the pandemic, Russia invasion of Ukraine, and all these crises and challenges that Europe is facing. So it would be great if you can help us understand how Europe economic paradigm has evolved in the recent years.
Thank you, and thanks Julia and Ramon for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here. I'm going to try to give a little bit of a bird's view of recent developments in economic policy and what I think, no crystal ball, but what I read that policymakers are intending to, what direction they're intending to go in the future. I think, if we look at just the most recent, we can go back and talk about Brexit and others, but let's just focus on the main recent events that have really changed the geopolitical environment and EU's thinking about economic policy. I think that COVID was really a watershed moment because it laid bare the vulnerability of supply chains. It displayed an instinct of nationalism when it comes to security and economic security, and also that inspired a new wave of thinking about economic policy, whereby security can trump cost. This is when the talk about all of these fancy EU terms, but open strategic autonomy, and then also nearshoring and friendshoring really started. I have to stress that it is not just talk. This has an impact on trade environment for companies, for businesses. Just to give you one piece of data from Global Trade Alert, which monitors globally the measures that government put in place. In 2023, we had 530 harmful trade interventions, and this is up almost 3 times from a year before, 2022, and up 14 times since 2019. So it's really a trend. Governments are intervening more and more in the realm of trade, and not always. So the net, there's also data on the positive interventions, but the negative interventions are a net amount. So there's other trends at play, of course. There's been 2 recent shocks that have convinced and sparked realization in the EU. One is about our over-reliance on Russian gas imports, and we still haven't answered that question, how the EU can be competitive, being a net energy importer, and you know, having prices, energy prices, electricity prices that are generally 3 times as high structurally compared to the US. Another one is our extensive reliance on China as both an export market for EU products, but also as a supplier of critical materials, and the areas in which the EU is more and more willing to engage with partners like Korea are overlapping with the ones that it pinpoints as potential troubles for security in the future. So critical industrial inputs including rare earths, pharmaceutical ingredients, chips, and other electronic components. So this has resulted in an effort in both differentiating EU sourcing markets and securing the supply chains, especially in critical sectors. This does provide an opportunity for countries in Asia and Latin America that the EU perceives as like-minded, as well as seeking to even out the playing field in trade relationships, which the EU perceives as uneven. What does it mean then, all of this, for EU economic policy going forward? Well, just one signal. Sometimes in the EU, names and titles don't mean much, but I think that the one of the new designate Commissioner for Trade does mean something. He's now the Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security. It's not just symbolic, I think, but it does signal how the EU is going to approach trade policy going forward in a much more defensive way. We already have rules on screening inbound FDI, and they have been used. There is now a push, which is still nascent, about screening outbound investment too, following what the US has done. More broadly, I think what the EU trade policy will look like is fewer trade deals going forward, but closer ties and more opportunities for the countries that already have FTAs with the EU and that are perceived like allies, and trading in like-minded blocs. The tensions between US and China, I think, regardless of who wins the US elections, are going to continue, and the EU has to craft its own China policy, and it has been for quite a while now trying to find its own stance. But I think that it's fair to say that that stance is definitely more hawkish than in the past. We have had, just 5 days ago, this decision on the EU imposing tariffs on EVs from China, and from that decision you can definitely see that the EU isn't willing to completely align itself with US demands, but it is going to take an approach which is more assertive. I think it's interesting to break down the vote for those that don't follow these committees as closely as we do, but just the list of countries that voted in favor of applying tariffs on Chinese EVs, for me, was very surprising, because it's countries that you wouldn't have found there in even just 2 or 3 years ago. You have the Netherlands, you have Denmark, Poland, the Baltics, and Ireland, which are all members of the new Hanseatic League. They're open free traders, but on this issue, they definitely shifted. So there is a clear shift, not just from the Commission, but also in national thinking about economic policy. When it comes to EU internal economic policy, this applies also to internal procurement rules, this inward shift, I would say. we have seen that there is a stance for more common procurement. Now there is a focus on defense, but that applies to could apply to other sectors as well. And on defense particularly, we have seen how the argument of security and also promotion of EU products sometimes trump the argument of cost or efficiency of trade. So the EPC, the European Peace Facility, which reimburses countries for purchasing weapons in a common way, the rules have been set in a way that precedence has to be given to European-made weapons at the expense of American or Korean exports. So there is that shift even trickles down into very concrete rules of how do we spend common money and common purchasing. More looking at other areas of EU policy, there is a lot of discussion on competitiveness and industrial policy. I think to me, it is still unclear what does that really mean and whether there is an agreement on that at this point in the Council and among the institutions. There is likely going to be a rethink about EU state aid rules and competition rules in a way that would allow larger players at EU level and for subsidizing what are considered to be strategic sectors. But at the same time, you know, in industrial policy, there's always a trade-off. There's always a push for picking some winners, some sectors, some companies, and this has the potential within the EU to create more divergence because these players are likely to be located in regions, clusters of already developed markets and economies. So there is also a counter push to that, which is countries that are less likely to benefit from industrial policy subsidies, which want to ensure that this does not come at the expenses of competitiveness within the EU, within the single market. So I think that on the industrial policy front, the discussion is still more open than compared to what the trade policy one has more evolved toward more protectionism. It is also unclear when it comes to, I very much like this distinction between protection and promotion, because I also think that in the EU there is more of a push for protection, but the question of promotion is still very much unanswered. It's unclear how the EU can rival other blocs when it comes to investment incentives. We have seen the US IRA, we are now seeing China's stimulus package, and these are simply not measures that the EU can take because it's not levers that it has at its disposal. At national level, yes, EU countries can intervene in the economy, and indeed since COVID they have done so to a very large extent. But at European level, demand-side measures are still very controversial. There is no clarity on how much support the EU should give to industry with funds, how much should those be socialized, and so on. So I think that discussion on the tools for the promotion is likely to continue to divide the EU, whether we need more public funding and for what. So just to sum up, I want to say I don't think this is a 100 degrees turn in EU economic policy, but it's certainly a reorientation. The EU does remain fundamentally a trading bloc and an open one compared to others, but and it needs to remain that to justify its very existence. So I think it cannot depart too much from its, it's a trading bloc to start. There are opportunities for more trade with countries that are perceived as reliable allies and trading partners, but it is definitely a changed political environment, and this will shape EU economic policies and priorities going forward. Thank you.
Paola, thank you very much. This has been really interesting, and I think it will link really well with what Ji Jeong will tell us later on, in a sense that in your work at ROK Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you look exactly at this link between economic security and foreign policy, and how this is also impacting ROK policies a bit. So it would be great if you can share more about your views on these interlinkages between the two, so economic security on the one hand and foreign policy stances on the other.
Thank you, Julia. And also, I would like to give appreciation to the kind invitation from the Korea Chair at VUB and the support from the Korea Foundation. It is my great pleasure and honor to participate in this distinguished panel. In regarding to answer the question from our chair, in fact, to give out an outline of Korea's economic security policy, actually, we do have, it is quite clear that economic security is one of the policy priorities in Korea, since we have a separate office within the presidential office with the deputy director focusing on economic security and cybersecurity issues as well. But at the same time, we do not really have an official document that lays out the whole breadth of economic security strategy in Korea, just like in the EU. So I think there is also some room for interpretation. And for me today, I would like to provide some personal reflections based on some of my experience obtained by working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but not necessarily the stance of the government. In terms of Korea's economic security policy, I think there can be three main objectives and challenges in securing our economic security. And first one, which is quite familiarized to everyone in this room, I think first one is how to strengthen supply chain resilience. The second one would be how to maintain and nurture our current and future in critical industries and technologies. And the third one would be how to be responsive and coordinate economic security measures with the like-minded countries. And achieving such goals, I believe one unique feature that arises in the policy-making scene these days is the increased influence and intervention of domestic policy to the process of foreign policy making and vice versa. And I think this can be rephrased as a universal challenge you find in every country in the current political environment, how to balance, so to speak, economic nationalism and also international cooperation. And I think I could give some examples in the Korean perspective. So first one regarding the supply chain resilience. One of the main concerns for Korea right now in establishing supply chain resilience is the sector in critical minerals. And Ministry of Foreign Affairs is currently working as the chair of Mineral Security Partnership, the MSP, where like-minded countries, including the EU, gather to facilitate investment in critical mineral supply chain and strengthen resilience for the longer term. One of the co-projects that Korea is participating in is for the purpose of establishing a new graphite supply chain that would be independent of any particular party who dominates the current critical mineral supply chain. So it really is a project for de-risking from overdependence. Yet, to make this project successful, I guess there are further concerns on how we would be able to cope with fierce price competition in the market, which in fact would be a precondition for this supply chain to survive and maintain sustainability. And as much as the current government is putting much of its willingness to support cooperation and support from the like-minded countries to utilize and maintain such trusted supply chain would be imperative. The second one would be on the competitiveness in critical industries and technologies. And Korea these days is considered a strategic partner for many countries, especially for its manufacturing capacity in strategic industries like batteries, electric vehicles, and semiconductors. And in certain ways, Korean companies have been demanded and were able to catch opportunities for new investments in our partner countries as well. Yet, the subsidy race happening all over the globe poses threats of industrial hollowing in Korea as well in terms of technology and talent drainage as well. Given such backdrop, the Korean government is inevitably under some domestic pressure to expand its subsidy programs as well. And in the bird's eye view, if we have all these subsidies going on also among our like-minded countries, we might end up with no effect in any of these subsidy programs as they may all offset each other. So in that sense, we would definitely need some efforts in policy coordination among the like-minded countries to manage a sound ecosystem within the trusted value chain. At the same time, Korea would want further opportunities to collaborate with the like-minded countries in advanced emerging technology areas for R&D in exchange of current strategic cooperation, maybe through the Horizon Europe and so on. And searching for strategic complementaries would render further collaboration opportunities among the like-minded countries for the sake of building a common trusted bloc of economic resilience. Last but not least, there is also a serious dilemma in how to cope with external shocks, including the measures imposed by like-minded countries against their strategic competitor or any other partners that bring about subsequent economic impact to Korea. And Korea, as primarily a trading economy, I don't think it has a priority intention to enforce any proactive policies for economic statecraft in its own will. However, Korea faces increasing demands from its partners to cooperate, for example, in export control measures, on the one hand. And on the other hand, there have been incidents where Korea had to cope with its partners' countries' other policy decisions that directly impact Korea economically. And regarding such cases, Korea faces two big questions. So the first one would be, how can we minimize the direct economic impact while cooperating with our like-minded countries for the long-term security reasons? And the second one would be, how can we be ensured that the like-minded countries will predictably be on the same page when in reality, in the shorter term, economic interests could actually vary even among them? And especially regarding this second question, I think it is also quite timely for us to start discussing how to rebuild a principled governance system on trade as well, at least within the like-minded countries, to clarify the common goal, to guide policy actions, and really coordinate interests in a more stable and predictable way. And I'll stop here for now.
Thank you. Very interesting points, and I'm sure we will go back to some of those in the Q&A later on. Georg, your turn to conclude a bit this first round, and you advise both the EU and also the French government on these issues. So now we are all here, looking forward to hear from you also how Europe is trying to reconcile, this public and private link in Europe as well.
Thank you, Julia. I'm a think tanker, so I'm not sure who I advise really. We put analysis and recommendations out there, and then we hope that they do get picked up. But this is my first time at the Brussels Korea Forum, and that's certainly a pleasure. And you asked me sort of to wrap up a little bit with focus on public-private cooperation. I must say that the colleagues who've just spoken have really covered the ground a lot. And as they were speaking, I noted down 3 points maybe I wanted to come back on. One is why we're talking about economic security right now. 2, what's happening in Europe, and 3, the private-public cooperation point. And I think indeed if we are asking ourselves the questions, what's happening on economic security in the EU right now, and how do we assess it? I think it's always useful to ask oneself the questions, why we're talking about economic security. What are the imperatives? What are the urgencies? And Paula covered it very well. She said 3 years ago it was because of COVID. But I think we should ask ourselves, what is it that really is driving this conversation, or should be driving this conversation right now? And making the link back then to the first panel, I think there are 2 elements really we need to be attentive to, and more attentive to at the EU level. And the first one is that we are facing what I would call a multi-front precarious security situation right now. That will probably get worse, possibly much worse, before it gets better, across 3 major theaters: Europe, Indo-Pacific, and Middle East. There are real dire security questions out there. The second is, I think we are right now witnessing an accelerating division, if not fragmentation, of the world economically, the world economics order. And I think this economic order will divide much faster than we think, or we like, at least here in Europe, driven by US-China strategic rivalry and what I call also the switch from a WTO-based order to a sanctions-based order. And I really think that 5th of November, or what happens in the months afterwards, the US presidential elections will be a further accelerator of that. So I think when we're talking about economic security now, the picture has really changed, or should really have changed in our minds compared to 3 years ago. It's not about dealing with unlevel playing fields or less open markets. It's not about dealing with the sort of adverse effects of others' industrial policies and Chinese export manufacturing. Of course, we have to deal with that too, and that's the story of the EVs. And this of the adverse effect of others' industrial policies is really the situation Europe finds itself in vis-a-vis China and US Inflation Reduction Act and all that. But I think it's much more dramatically and ominously the question of significant threat, security threats today, and the deep risks that dependencies represent that should drive the conversation. And to put it a bit sort of brutally, I think US and China are both preparing for a world of conflict. I'm not saying that they want it, or we will necessarily have it, but they are preparing for that. And I think that this is the kind of reasoning and strategic picture we have great difficulties of catching up with here in Europe. So that was the first point I wanted to make. The second point is what is happening in Europe, and it's as often in European matters, it's sort of a question of glass half full or glass half empty. I agree. Sort of the EU's economic policy paradigm is changing, but it's difficult for me to see the scale of change or the speed of change. Sorry, that is required, and sort of taking the bird's eye view on it. We have an economic security project at the EPC, and we've sort of said that this is about the EU entering the third period of its economic history. If you want, the first period of the EU's economic history was from the inception of the integration project until 1989, where EU was conducting economic policies in the circumstances of post-war reconstruction, creation of the single market, but in reality, relatively few competitive pressures from the outside world. Then you had this 30-year or 20-year period from 89 to 2010s, where you saw this largest expansion of the EU project with enlargement, globalization, and you had this thought in Europe that we could change or we could shape the world in our image. And I think what we really need to realize in Europe now is that those days are gone. We're not shaping anything anymore. We're no longer form of rule makers, even through Brussels effect and the size of our markets and those kind of things. Take this deforestation, what has happened on that file. We are rule takers of others' policies. And that is a profound change of mindset we need to get used to. And again, in a global environment that is becoming ever more conflictual and shock prone. And in this, I think we are facing a series of sort of make or break tests, both at the system level or macro level. If anything, I think Draghi in his reports understates the challenges. I don't think he's exaggerating them. And I think these make and break moments, they are coming very clearly in specific areas, sectors, and technologies, as you also mentioned. Either we are in the race in quantum, or we fall behind, and that will have significant prosperity and security consequences for the long future. So I think, yes, the EU is changing, but not fast enough. And it's not in our DNA, it's not in our mindset, in the setup of our institutions and in our political economy, as we look at it now in the EU, to deal adequately with this. So we have the economic security strategy. It talks about these 3 Ps, promote, protect, partner. I think there should have been a 4th P. They should start with a prepare, promote, protect, partner. I will join Mr. Wu Yong-yup and Paolo in saying that, yes, the protect measures are difficult enough, but really the promote running faster is even more difficult. So Draghi tries to propose solutions. He talks about investment, innovation, technological leadership. In a sense, growth for economic security and economic security underpinning growth. But we are facing difficulties in our construct to deal with this. And you mentioned that countries are not unitary actors. Think about the EU. The EU is even more complicated. As Paula said, costs and benefits of economic security are not shared equally between member states. There are very dire trade-offs with other goals between security and economic security, competitiveness, climate change, nature preservation, social inclusion. And last and significantly also, which was highlighted, it's really the private sector that are the foot soldiers of economic security. So how does the EU and Europe approach public-private cooperation? I think it's an area where we have a lot to learn from Korea, from Japan, just to take those two examples. Of course, there's been a change of mindset. I don't think anybody, in the case they believed in it, really believe anymore in this geostrategic environment and sort of the invisible hand of the market. We're getting used to more government intervention and economic statecraft. But I think we are, across the space of prepare, promote, protect, and partner, seeing great challenges. On prepare, well, we said we need to act on critical emerging technologies and start with risk assessments. I think what the Commission is finding, whether it's DG Connect or DG RTD, that it's very difficult actually to pull together these risk assessments because of the sensitivity of security-related and proprietary information from business to pull the information together. We are seeing in terms of promote, the previous Commission, the von der Leyen Commission, was doing a lot in terms of stating ambitions, but it was a lot about setting targets. If you take the Net Zero Industry Act, strategic net zero technologies, we all agree, they are talking about having manufacturing capacities that reach at least 40% of annual deployment needs by 2030. But those are just targets. And what we're struggling with so far is that it's not only about having to will the means, it's not only about willing the end, we have to will the means as well. And I think across our policy space right now, there are many examples in terms of wind power deployment, CCAs, chips or semiconductors, in fact, the whole digital agenda, where there's a lot of targets where, for the time being, the means to achieve them is not following. There's the question of very directly the type of tools we have for private-public cooperation. One of them is the industrial alliances. It is a positive story that we have them now. These are collaborative state-to-industry arrangement to boost technological industrial capacities. We have 11 of these alliances now on batteries, clean hydrogen, cloud, small nuclear reactors, and so forth. Of course, these alliances need to help being the intelligence hubs, but they also need to help bring funds to market, crowd in private investment, facilitate scaling. So the question is, are they working? Well, there are some positives, but it's really not yet at the speed and scale of what they should. Similarly, we don't have the massive scale resource mobilization you were mentioning we see in China and the US. We're trying to work through state aid frameworks, IPCEIs, etc. I think still they remain rather technocratic approaches and not proper public-private partnership approaches. There are examples we speak to industry in the area of helicopters, in fuel systems for planes, and so on, where economic operators are really scratching their head in terms of how to engage with this. So I think that there are positives, and that is that we are working on it. But I think, again, there's a lot to learn by cross-fertilizing with like-minded countries. And I think really, as was said, a critical test also then on the partnership for the EU is to have meaningful cooperation on all these critical areas. I think there's very little disagreement on the what. It's really at how we get down to the how now in a dramatically changed security and economic environment.
Georg, thank you very much. And it seems to me that when we look at technologies, at the end of the day, Europe and Korea start from two very different positions, right? So Korea on the one hand is really a leader in many of the technology sector that we discussed, whereas Europe is trying to catch up in a sense. But it seems even if they are on two different positions, at the same time, they both share this idea that we need the partnership, we need trusted value chain, we need to invest in the cooperation. So there is a common understanding that this is an important element that came up in all your intervention on the one hand. So before opening it up to the floor, maybe my question for all of you would be, so in your view, which is the right venue to have this discussion? Which is the right format for this partnership to continue and to start? In some cases, we see many new initiatives. Some of them are bilateral, some of them are minilateral. We see initiatives at different level, but do you see also a need somehow to try to coordinate all these small initiatives, or what is your view on the right, which is the right venue for this discussion on how to bring partnership forward? Maybe just as a first start. But then I will now open the floor. So please feel free to raise your hand and also to introduce yourself when asking a question. I'll try to collect a few at the beginning. Yeah.
My name is Reinhard Drüfte. I'm Emeritus Professor of University of Newcastle East Asia Center. I have a very simple question, maybe partly answered, but I haven't really got it. What can the EU learn from South Korea about dealing with Chinese exports of electric vehicles? And Korea, as you know, is a rather difficult market for foreigners. And you see, however, many more Korean cars in Europe. Hyundai is everywhere. And so this reminds me of the situation a bit of the 80s when Japan was increasingly dominating the car market in the EU. And the solution was Japanese investment. However, what I observed then was we went from a trade imbalance to an FDI imbalance. This worked okay. I mean, Britain has, again, a car industry, although it belongs to German companies, Indian company, and Japanese, of course. So that is my question. Another very different point about technology. I'm a bit concerned that because of the Ukrainian war and the efforts of developing arms technology, arms production, that we might not have enough brain power, enough money to compete also on the commercial side. Maybe that's the thing one should address as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. And there is one. Right.
Anali from the European Commission. I have a short question to Jiyoung, Miss Yu. I would appreciate if you could provide a amplification on the term so-called like-minded countries. Apart from EU, where else is included? And amongst which country or group hold the top priority in terms of setting a tangible framework to establish supply chain resilience? Thank you.
Good, thank you. If there are no other questions for this first, there is one over there, so let's try to hear. Matej.
Thank you. Edward Howell from Oxford University and Chatham House. A very quick question to Ms. Yu, but also to the other panelists. What is the role of the United Kingdom in this? The UK signed the Downing Street Accord last November. Is there a place for the UK in the broader ROK Europe security and technology cooperation, or even bilaterally?
Good, thanks. Maybe let's start with this first round. And Georg, would you like to start? So we do reverse order?
Yeah. I can start with pleasure. I don't know if it was directed first and foremost to me, but on the question of like-minded countries, I think it's a good concept, but we have to be a little bit careful with it. And to me, it's essentially a concept with of variable geometries. So in many respects, Europeans and Americans will be like-minded. We are bound together in an absolutely critical security defense alliance, NATO, when it comes to the defense of WTO rules. We're not like-minded with the US. Let's be frank. I don't think Americans care about the WTO anymore. Whereas for us, defending an economic order that's based on the same rules for all is essential. So in other respects, like-minded, you can talk about G7++. In many other respects, I think like-minded should lead us to look to Africa, to South America. There's definitely a lot of like-mindedness, if I might say, between Europe and many countries in the Indo-Pacific. So I don't think it's helpful actually to sort of to try to put down a definitive list, an exclusive list. It really depends on what we're talking about, and that's a reflection of the fact that the world is complex now, and we're pursuing different important priorities, from climate change to security, and so on and so forth. On what the EU can learn from South Korea dealing with the exports of EVs, I think maybe it's more for the colleagues to answer that, and I'm very curious to hear that answer myself. I think you are pointing, though, to something very interesting, which is the difference between perhaps the situation in the 80s and today. And I take one example of that. You can talk in terms of economic policies, in terms of the state of geopolitics or the geoeconomy, if you want. But look even at what you're talking about, cars. Cars used to be something made of steel and aluminum and plastic on 4 wheels. Now it's a tethered device, if you want. It's an iPhone on 4 wheels. And I think, in a sense, this story of tariffs on Chinese car exports to Europe, for the time being, it's a sort of level playing field issue, protection of industrial capacity, jobs, etc. I think we've seen from other jurisdictions that it's very much accelerating as a security question. These cars are full of sensors. Teslas can't access public buildings in China for given reasons. I don't know how quickly that debate will come to Europe, but I think a debate that will necessarily come from Europe is the mix between trade measures, tariffs, and what can you say, regulatory choices in terms of dealing with the tensions that are out there in the world today. You can take another example, windmills, wind turbines. Europe is due to roll out 300 gigawatt of offshore wind power by 2050 to meet its net zero targets, 130 gigawatt by 2030. That means 20 gigawatt every year from now. We're managing 7 or 8 of that. So we are failing on our path to net zero, to put it bluntly. So our net zero strategies need a course correction, but we're not talking a lot about that. But at the same time, there is sort of a tacit agreement that we should not accept the offers for Goldwind and so on and so forth to do a lot of those installations at half the cost of what Siemens and Vestas can do. And I think implicitly in that, there's a security question. We know that these wind turbines out there in the North Sea, they are critical nodes, if you want, in our energy grids, part of our energy security. And for IT and OT security reasons, we're saying, well, this is not the risk we can take anymore. And so what I'm trying to say, I don't know the Korean answer on EVs, But I think that the security dimension that is coming galloping at it into these trade questions, and in a sense, there's plenty of to unpack there that hasn't been done yet in the context of debates we've had on tariffs vis-a-vis Chinese EV exports. So those are a couple of elements of answers.
Okay, thank you for the questions. In terms of like-minded countries, I kind of follow what Georg already talked about. I feel it's more of a political term, and please don't mistake me. What I say right now is not really a government opinion of it, because we never really came up with any definition of like-minded countries are. And I think that is also there is some intention to not defining really what like-minded countries are, because it is a political term to be intentionally be inclusive and also exclusive, and depending on the issues that we have. And I think it's quite similar with the terms like economic coercion. What is coercion? How to define it? It depends on the situation, and it really can be flexible in different terms. So for like-minded countries, yes, it could be about countries that we share democratic values. It could be our clear allies. It could be some countries that we share very similar industrial structure or supply chain risks in this today. And really, it could depend from time to time and depending on the issues. And I think it is also the beauty of it that how we can actually expand this kind of partnership over and over to increase the economic resilience among the like-minded countries bloc. And also in connection to that, I think replying to our chair's question, the first question, I think this is why we have so much complexity in the interest between the like-minded countries, so to speak, that we are utilizing many different bilateral, minilateral, and plurilateral negotiations these days, because for each issues we have so many differences and complexities in the interests that we have. So I think we already have this multilateral fora or the plurilateral fora, but then there are specifics that we really want to come up with tangible outcomes, and that's why I think bilateral negotiations are really important these days. But then we can start from that, try to expand it with other like-minded countries to expand this partnership so that it can work and make it more institutionalized so that these like-minded countries can have a clear principle, for example, to make this cooperation more predictable and stable in a way. And also for the question with the role of the UK, it would be hard for me to just clear out exactly about this partnership. But then just to reflect back on what we do in the Center for Economic Security and Foreign Affairs, we actually had this cooperation project with the Wilton Park actually last year. We've been talking about technological cooperations, what kind of complementarities we can find between these two countries. So we invited lots of different experts from specific technology areas, including telecom, quantum, AI, and those kind of industries. And we really try to work on the specific complementarities where the scientists can actually come up with. So I think this could be like a good starting point of the conversation, and hopefully this kind of cooperation expands over time. Thank you.
I'm going to take 2 out of 4. On the like-minded countries, we really like that question. I think it was the IMF who tried to define it and quantify it, and I think they used as a proxy of like-mindedness the way that countries vote at the UN General Assembly. And this gives you a broad group, and as Georg said, is variable geometries, but it does also show that there's a correlation on how countries trade and how this is becoming more of a trend. It doesn't mean that there is, no trade with anyone else, and sometimes it's not so much decoupling, but it's coupling in other places. So there's also a conversation to be had about how much of this de-risking is happening via substitution of trading partners or a triangulation with the same trading partners, i.e. China and the US keep trading, they just do it in Mexico, for instance. And there are countries which are benefiting hugely from being able to speak to different actors, Vietnam, Mexico, just off the top of my mind, are some examples of this. And also a point, I think for the EU, what like-minded means changes very much when it comes to opportunities. So yes, there's a core at G7. Maybe we can say those are the core partners. But we're very happy to overlook differences when it comes to different questions, whether that is, I don't know, migration management or economic policy, and just we need partners on key questions, and so that definition is very porous and volatile, let's say. On the UK role, I mean, for much talk of a reset between UK and new relations, I think very early days, and it's still unclear to me very much how much re-engagement there will be on both sides. There's definitely some willingness, at least, to sit at the table and listen to each other, which hadn't been the case for the past few years. So that's perceived as a positive thing. I think the one key area which the EU sees as a potential ground for re-engagement and inclusion of the UK is the conversation around security, because it's not necessarily an EU, maybe it's a government-led conversation, but the contribution that the EU can give to a changed EU security geography is huge, and it will be very dumb to overlook that. So both when it comes to technological partnerships, there's EU member states that have long-standing cooperation with the UK and who want to retain that, continue, expand that. And there are tensions in the EU about whether that's safe or advisable. But I think the majority view is still that the UK is an ally, and it makes sense to continue that. But also, just more generally, if we are looking at a second Trump presidency, and even if not, if we are, as Europeans, to take more security in our hands, everybody, sitting on the continent is looking at the UK as one of the strongest armies, one of the nuclear power, and one of the most advanced economies in terms of security matters. So I think that is a field that the EU looks at with huge interest for a security defense partnership.
For first questions about like-minded countries, I think the definition of it may vary depending on what kind of issues that we are talking about. So when it, as Georg just mentioned, that if it's about some security issues or some specific areas of the security, the groupings of the like-minded countries can be different. But when we discuss this economic security, I think the bottom line might be that we have enough trust that the country will not weaponize our interdependence between the countries. So if we believe that our interdependence can be weaponized negatively against us, we would probably not think that that country is sharing views with us, so not like-minded countries. But even among Western Bloc, there's a Five Eyes countries, which the strength of the bonding might be totally different from the other countries. So I think the definition of it may vary. And I'm not sure whether I understand your question correctly, but about what EU can learn from South Korea about Chinese electric vehicles. So you
Keep the Chinese out.
Actually, we are not completely shutting out Chinese EVs penetration in South Korea. Probably in passenger vehicles, because of the culture, because of the recent history, South Koreans tend to have negative views toward Chinese, and usually many countries have nationalistic sentiment toward their cars. That is why maybe in passenger vehicles, not many Korean customers are willing to buy Chinese passenger vehicles. But those areas where the Chinese EVs have like competitiveness, like electric buses, and small commercial vehicles, since we don't make small commercial vehicles like trucks. It's all Chinese EVs right now in South Korea. And we are not trying to compete against those Chinese EV trucks, because even if we are making EVs, we cannot compete against with them because their price is so low. So it's about markets, it's about consumer perception toward this. So I really don't think it's the difference between European market and Korean market is derived from some kind of policies. So it's more of a culture and more of the sector. And we still can make some lower cost vehicles within our country. That is why we can still keep our markets safe for our company. But I really don't think it's because of the government policy against Chinese vehicles.
Good, thank you. Let me just check if there are some final questions. In that case, please also mention with whom the question is direct to, as we are trying to use this as the final session for questions. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, I'm Hannah Radigan, research student from BSOG, and this is more directed to George. He was talking about the supply chain and the energy sector. And I just wanted to know how are both regions working together to mitigate the risks of cyber attacks in critical infrastructures, more on the energy sector, and what more can be done to improve this collaboration?
Good, thank you. And there was another one. Yeah, Sally. Yeah.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Salih Bora, a postdoctoral researcher at the CSDS. And my question is more oriented to Mr. Jung Yeop. At the same time, I think it follows up a bit on the previous question on what Europe can learn from Korea. I mean, one term that is coming up increasingly often is the developmental state, which, I mean, in Korea, as like in the literature at least, it goes that since the 60s, Korea has been able to sort of leapfrog its economic development through very active state intervention and sort of revolving doors and cooperation between the corporate and public sector and agencies. Is it a success that like you think could be replicated in Europe in a way? And is this perception of South Korea's economic success an accurate perception anyway? Did you experience perhaps the existence of a developmental state? Is it a model that can be exported? Because right now, from what I see in people who do industrial policy in the EU, this term is coming up so often that I wondered if I could ask you how you see sort of this reappropriation.
Good, thank you, Sally. And there is a final one here, I guess. And so we are at 3.
Thank you very much, Ben Stemmet from King's College London. And I just would like to throw back Julia's question to the panel because everyone avoided it, and I think it was super important. What do you think, based on mostly Georg's brief, it seems that the EU's policies kind of work, but don't work as much as we would hope for. How you, Paula and Georg, see this? The backup option is cooperating bilaterally. EU member states should cooperate bilaterally with South Korea because it's easier, and some member states have more stake on it, like the Dutch has semiconductor industry, and how our Korean panelists see this. Do you see is more efficient to cooperate with the EU as an organizational level, or it is more efficient to cooperate for South Korea bilaterally with those countries that have stake on this economic security and technology cooperation? Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. And we will start this way, maybe just very quick answers, like 1 minute max if you can. So we're trying to finish on time, also because we are entering into lunch territory. So, yeah.
Thank you for the question. And I'm not sure whether the government policy that led to the economic success in 60s and 70s can still work in 2024. Because the society is totally different, and government policy at that time could be achieved at the expense of some sectors within Korean society, which it cannot be tolerated right now with all the political economic reasons that Paula mentioned in her speech. And even something is very obvious that government guidance makes sense, but economic interest, economic incentive for the private sector will make them not to follow government guidance in some cases. For example, about like 2 or 3 years ago, there's a shortage of the urea solution for diesel commercial trucks, AdBlue issues. Chinese did not intentionally reduce the export of urea solution to South Korea. There was a problem within China of the supply chains. So it's not their intention, but with a couple days of the reduction of export of urea solution from China to Korea, South Korean trucks had to stop. So because urea solution is so cheap, no Korean companies want to make it. So more than 90% of urea solutions are imported from China. So government says that we need to diversify, right? Because over-dependence on China for urea solution is not good for China. But no company followed that order because you cannot make money by buying urea solution from somewhere else. So I really don't think that the government intervention or state-led like industrial policy is extremely difficult right now or within the South Korea right now, even politically. So I really don't think that the policies in 60s, 70s can be replicated right now, even in underdeveloped countries.
I'll try to be very quick on this last question. Well, trade's EU competence, so with everything that in terms of standards, in terms of cooperation, I think it starts becoming really difficult if every country has its own interactions. And also it puts some EU countries, if they venture in this area of just bilateral relationship, at risk because their relative weight is less if we agree as a whole. Just one example, I was talking to a Dutch diplomat yesterday who told me that the US government has asked them to export ASML machinery, but without maintenance to China and other partners. And, the EU can provide the forum to discuss how the Netherlands should export its technology, but not, I think, a foreign power. So that's my answer, I think.
If I may add on the debate on developmental state, I think the theory or the perspective itself is quite controversial in certain ways, and what were the preconditions of it and all that. And I think it was also possible because there was this. It was in the era of free trade. If not Korea was fully doing it, but still it was promoting exports and it was really looking outward in a certain sense. And I do agree with Dr. Wu how it wouldn't be possible exactly to implement it in the current era. And at the same time, from the points that he mentioned, I think it's also a reflection of how it's not really just about how one country excels in certain industries or exports and trade and economic growth, but really the talk right now, when we talk about economic security, it's more about economic resilience. So the Euro solution example would be about, it's not an industry where all these companies would like to get more competitiveness, especially in Korea, but because we need to focus on these kind of issues as well, because now we're talking about resilience and things about just-in-case kind of situations. So I think there's a little change in the discussion as well. Thank you.
Right. On 4 quick points then maybe. Just a short reflection on the EVs. I think we got a very interesting answer. It's not only about culture, it's about the competitive position. And I think this is, we should be introspective or look at ourselves. And a lot of the bind we find ourselves in now is because of our own strategic mistakes. If you think about it, it's not that many years back that BMW had a CEO who openly said he didn't believe in the future of EVs. And now it's the same company that says, okay, please put, in my view, Volkswagen's or BMW's interests ahead of Europe's interest. I don't think Volkswagen's, what's good for Volkswagen is necessarily good for Europe. And I think I'm very happy the decision went the way it was, the way it went, where we actually are standing up and taking forceful measures, showing that we are capable of acting together and not only taking a short-term view of given industrial sectors. So that was a small comment on EVs. On cyber attacks, there was a question directly addressed at me. How do we prevent cyber attacks and work together in critical sectors such as energy? I've long learned one shouldn't try to talk about something one knows nothing about. So I have no answer to that. I think we will have to ask more qualified people. I did note when it came to cyber attack, a very interesting comment the other day by a Polish minister who said that in the cyber domain, we're not in some form of Cold War. We are in a very hot war. And I think these are risks that we probably are not talking enough about and where we have insufficient responses and also probably insufficient collaborative practices. But again, I'm not the expert of cyber security in policies and responses. On the venues questions, very quickly, I think we should not have a problem in accepting that there will be multiple venues, and there needs to be multiple venues. There's a bandwidth question at the EU level, there's a competence question. Clearly, a lot of bilateral discussions need to happen and exchange EU-Korea. There are other formats, G7, that brings in the member states, and very naturally so. But when you come to the specifics, chips policy, so I don't know, photonic integrated circuits, have the leading ecosystems speak amongst themselves. You have EU chips policies, the joint undertaking, pilot lines in the area of quantum chips, in the area of photonics chips, that will designate specific leading ecosystems in Europe. Those ecosystems, whether they're Dutch or Spanish or collaborative ecosystems, need to be very well connected with, if you want, similar ecosystems in Korea. So I think that's not a problem. It will be a multiple venue kind of approach. But of course, I think we do have a lot of homework in Europe in trying to simplify and unify and be more collaborative. And one example I took is industrial alliances. If we're saying we're having these industrial alliances, well, let's make them also tools of partnership. That means that member states, EU, domestic industry need to invest in these alliances as the vehicles for a better dialogue of cooperation with partners such as in Korea. And the final point I want to make on the UK role, I spent 5 years of my life as part of the Brexit task force negotiating the breakup of relations with UK, and I hope we're in a more positive phase now. I think a lot of things can be done without reopening the current agreements. One needs to, of course, avoid trade-offs and difficult questions related to fisheries and these kind of things. But I hope there will be maturity in the room to do that. And it comes back to the initial point I made. I think the US presidential elections will be an accelerator in a push from the US for all the rest of us, if I may say, to deal more robustly with the strategic rivalry with China and the dire risks that are building up in the global system. And I think from an EU point of view, dealing with this will be much easier if there can be cooperative or common approaches with critical partners such as the UK or Korea. So that'll be my last words. Thank you.
Good. Thanks a lot. Thank you also for staying till the end, for the very good questions and for the exchange. I think it's time to wrap it up, also because we are the ones standing between you, physically, between you and the lunch behind here. But thank you very much. Please join me also thanking our panelists today for very good points and very good reflections on how technologies and economic security are linked together. Thank you very much.